This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and joining me today is one of my most requested guests, former WWF North American champion, three-time WWF Tag Team champion, former WWE 24/7 champion, and winner of the 1988 King of the Ring, and even held the world title in WWE for an unofficial amount of time. Ed DiBiase from the WWE Hall of Fame. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Good to be here.
To start this off, I guess you were adopted by Iron Mike DiBiase, and he passed away in the ring. That must have been quite a traumatic experience for you.
Yeah. Mike came into my life when I was 15 years old. 5 years old. He and my mother got married. My mother, there's a lot of guys. I've got a lot of friends that, came from wrestling families where, it's just like, Bob Orton and the Funks and everything. Their dads were wrestlers, but not too many of them can say that both of their parents were wrestlers. Both of my parents were wrestlers. That's how they met. My mother's wrestling name was Helen Hild, and that's how they met. And he became dad, and he had us. He was not only respected as a great professional, but he had an unbelievable amateur career. He wrestled in the Navy. While he was in the Navy, in 1946, he was the AAU National Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. And then he went on to Nebraska, and at Nebraska, lettered 8 times, 4 years in wrestling and 4 in football, and just as an outstanding career. So, he was my hero. He's the guy I looked up to and wanted to emulate. And when I lost him, we had, he and the Funks. I've known the Funk family, almost all my life. And Dory Funk Sr. and my dad were very good friends. And they had one of the longest wrestling matches in history, a 3-hour and 20-minute Texas death match. And anyway, I went back. I had signed a scholarship to play football at the University of Arizona, and I was watching TV one day, and wrestling came on. I hadn't seen any wrestling since my father's death in 1969. And so, I'm watching TV, and the wrestling show comes on, and then I realize it's the tape from Amarillo, Texas, and it's the Funks, and they're coming to Arizona, to Tucson, for a show. And so I said, man, this is awesome. So I went to visit them and meet them. I hadn't seen any of them for 3 years. And Terry talked me into taking a recruiting trip to West Texas State. And he said, even if you've made up your mind you're going to go to the U of A, that's great. He says, just take the trip. It's free. Come see everybody. Well, that's all it took, was for me to just get around it a little bit for a little while. And, my heart was set on being a wrestler. It always was. So I went to West Texas State, and there's a whole slew of guys that played football at West Texas State that didn't just become wrestlers, but became stars. Both the Funk brothers, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Bobby Duncombe, Tito Santana, myself, and Tully Blanchard were all on the same team. And so there's a bunch of guys. I think West Texas State graduated more pro wrestlers than they did pro football players. But that was, that was my inspiration, was my dad. And he was a good man, and I still miss him. And I hope that he would, be happy with, how life has turned out for me.
And I understand Dick Murdoch played in some of the games too, but he may not have actually gone to the school for West Texas State.
What? That's funny, and it's true. It's they had an alumni game, and it was like the all the old guys come back to play against the current team. Like it was like, during like the spring game special, and then Murdoch played in the game, and he never, he never went a day to West Texas State, but he tells everybody that he did. By the way, Dick Murdoch is, somebody that I also think doesn't get the credit he deserves as a professional wrestler. I mean, he was one of the guys I learned so much about the wrestling business from that guy. It's incredible. I miss him too.
And you mentioned Bruiser Brody went there. Did you cross paths with him much over the years?
When I first started, what's funny is I remember the summer of '75 is I was going to try it out. I was going to see if I really wanted to wrestle. I had the previous summer. Now this is the summer between my sophomore and junior year in college. I refereed for the Amarillo territory, and so now it's the summer between my junior year and senior year. And I went down and because Dick Murdoch said, hey, I think I can get you booked. Bill Watts will book you, and you can get your feet wet in the business this summer. And so that's what I did. And that ended up being a big mistake because I never went back to school. That was the summer of 1975. And I now forgot your question.
I better guess you ran into Brody during that time.
The first trip I made, I flew into Shreveport, Louisiana, and my first road trip. I jumped in the car with Bruiser Brody. Just met him then, and I think we went down to Alexandria for a show that night, and then back up to Shreveport. And so I met him right out of the gate, and of course he and Stan Hansen were a great team. They were a great tag team and good friends, over in Japan. And then when Brody jumped ship and left all Japan and went to New Japan, Stan came to me and he said, hey, Brody's jumped ship. He's going to the other company, and he says, I need a new partner. Do you want the job? And I said, absolutely. That was a big break for me too.
Now, I understand when your father had that issue in the ring, Harley Race actually was the guy that came in and tried to perform CPR. And I know he had to do with training your sons, and you guys are very close. Could you share any stories about him?
Yeah, I loved Harley Race, and that's the truth. The night my dad died, it was Harley who ran out to ringside and tried to save his life. Performed artificial respiration on him, and kept him basically alive and with a heartbeat until the ambulance got there. And I know Harley was very mad because he felt like the people that came to pick him up, it was almost like this is another wrestling show thing, and they didn't think it was real until they got there. And he said, I could see the look of, oh my God, this guy is really dying on their face. And so, he shared all of that with me, and went with him, in the ambulance to the hospital, and they just couldn't save him. He brought his wrestling gear, his wrestling bag, to me the next day. Ever since that, and then when I started that summer, the summer of '75, one of the first trips I made was to El Paso. El Paso was one of the wrestling towns in the Amarillo territory at the time, and Harley was there. It's the first time I had seen him, since my father died, and we just picked up where we left off, and he was somebody who helped a lot too. I mean, in terms of things that I learned from him. I asked him a lot of questions, and he was great to help me. And as we went along, I remember him telling me, he he said, kid, he said, you're gonna be good. He said, I can tell already you're gonna be good. You're gonna do real well. And he says, and maybe one day you'll wear this belt. And that was, of course, the NWA World Championship. And the closest I got was I think remember Terry Funk called me and he said, Teddy, he says, there's 3 names in the hat: Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, and you. And as it turned out, Dusty got it, Rick got it, and somehow I didn't. Well, and I probably know why I didn't, because I spent the better part of the first 12 years of my wrestling career wrestling for Bill Watts. And Bill Watts is one of the most brilliant promoters. I mean, his knowledge of wrestling, I didn't realize how fortunate I was to have started under him, because I learned a whole lot about this wrestling business from Cowboy Bill Watts. And Bill Watts learned it from a guy named Eddie Graham, and Eddie Graham learned it from Dory Funk Sr. So, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah, I actually just interviewed Eric Watts not too long ago, and he shared a lot of good stories about Bill. Do you have any memories of the fan attacks in that territory? Because the fans were very rabid and passionate.
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, you had to be, it's called the quiet heat. It's like it, and I've only seen it a couple of times personally, and it's when the fans get so mad and they're so angry, they get quiet, and it's kind of like it's kind of like the calm before the storm. It's like they get quiet, and then they start coming in the ring, and I think the only time I experienced it, I mean, of course, I wasn't in the match. I can't remember who was in the match, but I know that both dressing rooms had to unload and hit the ring, and it was a melee for a while until they got order. So yeah, they call it quiet heat. So
How was the Junkyard Dog to work with back then?
JYD was one of my best friends. He and I became very close. And again, to Bill Watts' credit, Bill Watts is the first wrestling promoter to ever feature as one of his premier stars a black guy, and it was JYD. And the dog was a great guy. What he was really good at, was his mic skills. On the microphone, he was excellent. I mean, you talk about a guy that had charisma, just dripping out of him. In the ring, he wasn't it's kind of like, he wasn't as technical. He wasn't as gifted there. He needed somebody to lead him, but nonetheless, he was very good, and we made a lot of money together. And when I turned heel, I turned on him, and I remember telling Grizzly Smith, who was kind of like Bill Watts' agent, and who went to the towns and brought us the finishes and let everybody know what they were doing that night. And I remember telling Grizz, I said, I'm not driving my car to New Orleans the first time I wrestled Dog after I turned heel, because 95% of the crowd in New Orleans was black. And he said, why? I said, because when I come out of the building, my wheels will be gone, or anyway. He said, okay, well, ride with me, I'm neutral. So I rode with Grizzly Smith that night, and we had the match, and we had and he comes in the dressing room, I'm getting dressed, and he puts his hands on his hips, and he looks at me, and he's just shaking his head. And I said, Grizz, what's wrong? I said, was something wrong with the match? He said, no, dang it, the match was great. I said, so what's wrong? He said, they slipped my tires, all 4 of them. So they punctured all of his tires just because he rode with me. Because I rode with him. So, the wrestling fans back then took their wrestling pretty serious.
And you did have a run in WWF back in 1979 where you held the North American Championship, which I guess went on to be unified into the Intercontinental Championship. Any memories of that?
Yeah, that was my first trip to New York, and they brought me in as the North American Heavyweight Champion, and I mean, introduced me that way. Then I can't remember just who it was I was talking to. It might have been, it was Chief Tate Strongbow or one of the agents, and I just happened to tell him. And this is after a few weeks of me, walking out and being introduced as the North American Champion. I said, Cowboy Bill Watts, his main champion down in Mid-South is the North American Heavyweight Champion. They didn't know that, and so that was the deal where, they just made up this story that, so Pat Patterson, when Pat Patterson came in, I dropped the North American title to Pat Patterson, and then they made up the story that he went off to this big wrestling tournament in Rio de Janeiro, and all the champions put up their belts, and whoever came out the winner was the Intercontinental Champion. That's how they changed the name of the belt.
And of course, you had Hulk Hogan's first match in WWF back when he was still a heel in Madison Square Garden. Any memories of that?
Yeah, well, that was great. I mean, that was it was actually my last match. I was I'd been there. I don't know, like not quite a year, but I was going to go back to Mid-South, and I remember Vince Sr. coming to me, and he says, we've got a lot of big hopes for this guy, and he says I want you to get him over. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you want me to do it? And he just looked at me and he said, Ted, he says, I trust you. He says, I know you'll do it. You'll do it well. And I did. And I put him over. And that was what was funny, is that I was the baby face and he was the heel. And afterwards, the Hulkster, he thanked me, and he told me then, he said, you don't know how much I appreciate this. He says, I owe you one. And then I saw him again. It wasn't, I can't remember it, so he goes on to become this big star. And I saw him somewhere else, and the next time I saw him, he looked at me and he said, I still owe you one. And so then, of course, when I went back to work, for them in '87, that time when I saw him, he says it's payback time. And of course, the rest is history.
And for fans that don't know, I mean, I've wrestled a bit. Your first match in the territory is so important. And if you had somehow blown that for him, it could have ruined his whole run.
Yeah, that's correct.
Gregory has a question for you. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using your real name as a wrestler?
Well, I've never known anything else. I mean, there's a lot of guys that don't use their real names. Of course, when people see you, they recognize you. So whatever name you're using, that's if it's not your real name, that's what they're going to call you anyway. And so to me, there's it's never been an issue. I mean, my dad used his name. I use our name. Maybe now, of course. Vince Jr., once he took over and everything, a lot of the guys, he owns the $1 Million Man name, but he can't own Ted DiBiase. He can't own my name. And so that's one advantage for sure. And, so that has enabled me to do a lot of things that otherwise might not have been able to do. Just because of that, their ownership. I don't have to go to them every time that somebody wants me to do something and say, hey, can I do this? Or am I gonna get yelled at for using my name? So to me, it was just always an advantage.
And of course, when you came back to WWF, that was your big run. But I think initially you were brought in as a babyface. Was it always supposed to be like that, or was it always going to be the $1 million man? How did it come about?
Well, no, no. Well, when I went to New York, yeah, the first time, I was a baby face, and that was and I was working, of course, for Vince Senior, and that was in '79. And I, if you looked at me back then, I mean, oh my gosh, I mean, today I was signing pictures. I've got this one, the cards, like the little cards that all the kids get, like the baseball size cards. I signed a bunch of my cards today with the very first picture I ever took. And I mean, gosh, I looked like a baby. So, I mean, like, I don't think anybody would have believed me as a heel had I tried to be a heel, that first time around.
So how did they approach you the second time when they brought you in and when they recruited you? Did they tell you about this character?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I had, I had, I had a great deal come up for me in Japan. Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody had been the hottest ticket in all Japan pro wrestling as far as what the gaijin, the foreigners. Stan and Brody were they were top, and Brody left All Japan and signed on with New Japan, which back then was unheard of, because the Japanese are so into loyalty, that type of thing. And anyway, so Stan came to me and he said, "Look," he says, "Brody's going to the other side." And he says, "I need a new partner. Do you want the job?" And I said, "Are you kidding? Are you, yeah, like, is a pig's butt pork? Come on. Of course. Thank you. I'll take it." And so, I became his tag team partner. And, so I donned the chaps and the vest, and I didn't get a hat because they don't make them that big. uh, and and we had a good run, but the run didn't last that long because this opportunity to go to work for Vince McMahon and the new WWF, came along, and I remember having to go to Giant Baba and tell him, as much as I appreciated what he'd done for me, that the opportunity to go to the WWF, it was one that that I couldn't pass up, because if I was going to stay relative in the wrestling world, that there wasn't any place else to go then, and everybody understood that, and so did Giant Baba. And he just told me, he said, "The door is open. Anytime you want to come back, we'll be here." And so I was grateful for that. And that's pretty much it. What was funny was Bruce Pritchard, who I've known for a long time. He used to work for Paul Boss down there in Houston, and we were standing in the back of the Houston Coliseum one night, and he told me, he says, "Look, I'm going to," and I was fixing to go to Japan, and he said, "Look," he said, I'm going up to New York next week to see about getting a job." And I said, "Well, just throw my name out there and see if anybody says anything." And so I go to Japan, and it's like about this, I don't know, the first weekend of the tour, and I come back to the hotel, and there's a message for me. It says, "Call Bruce Pritchard ASAP." And so I called Bruce and I said, "What's up, man?" And he said, "Well, two things have happened since you left." He says, "Number one," he said, "when you go back to Mid-South, Bill Watts is no longer your boss. Jim Crockett is, because Bill just sold Mid-South to Jimmy Crockett." And he said, "The other thing is, don't you dare sign a contract with Jim Crockett until you have an opportunity to speak with Vince McMahon, because he's extremely interested in you." And of course, the rest of is history.
Now, they did put you with Virgil, who has had some health problems and money problems lately. Do you still stay in contact with him? And what do you think about all that, all those issues, unfortunately, with him?
Well, I don't have anything against Virgil. He was a nice enough guy. We never, and it was kind of like, it was a business relationship more than anything. Virgil had a way of it was kind of like he would make stories up sometimes when it was easier just to tell the truth. I mean, that's the nicest way I can say that. And I know that he's probably had some issues. I didn't know, again, I'm here for this wrestling gig and signing autographs, and somebody else was telling me that, that his health wasn't good and what have you. And so I've never done a whole lot with him because of some of the things that he has done to himself, if you understand what I'm saying, and made it where people don't want him to come. And I guess, you get in a desperate situation, situations, and I guess desperate people do desperate things. But now that I'm hearing again that he's in poor health and what have you, I said, I can't remember who it was I was talking to, but I said, I wouldn't, I'd be okay. I'd be okay, if it will help him out, and somebody wants to book us, as a team to sign autographs, I'd be happy to do it. And I mean that.
He says he was a school teacher. Do you believe that? Because some people have said they've actually researched into the school where he said he was a math teacher and there was no record of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying is that he would, he made things up. He made things up that, if you knew him, if you knew him as well as a lot of people know him, that nobody would believe that, that he was a school teacher. And, it's kind of like, and that was one of the things that, puts you off is that, don't make stuff up, just tell the truth. But if he's in a real bad way, he's not a bad person. And I think some of those things he says is him trying not to look bad.
Just to go back for a minute, a fan gave a tip and wanted to know what was it like to work for Ole Anderson in Atlanta back in 1983 when you were national heavyweight champion.
Well, I really don't know because no sooner did I get there than Ole quit. I mean, I had just showed up on the scene. I remember, Terry Funk gave me a phone call, and he said, Teddy, he said, you need to get to Atlanta, get on that television show, and get over. He says, because your name's in the hat as one of the possibilities as the next NWA world champion. The other two names in the hat were Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair. And of course, I can't remember now whether Dusty or Rick got it first. I never did end up getting it. And I really believe that happened because I kept going back to Mid-South. And Bill Watts was not affiliated with the NWA. He said, I don't need it. And because I spent so much, the better part of the first 12 years of my career there, my name wasn't in the hat anymore.
Yes, and I've actually heard several people confirm that story, that your name was in the hat for that. Many fans would like to know about the making of the $1 Million Man vignettes that are so well remembered.
Well, I tell everybody, I said, if Vince McMahon could be a character in his own show, he'd have been the $1 Million Man. This idea was a Vince McMahon original. It was Vince's personal idea. And I remember when I went in and had that conversation with him, he said, Ted, he said, in wrestling, there's there's the good guys and the bad guys, but there's different kind of heels. There's, excuse the expression, but there's what we call the chicken shit heel. The guy who can actually wrestle, but he doesn't need to cheat, but he cheats anyway. And then when he gets confronted, he starts begging off. And he said that's probably the best type of heel there is, because people never get tired of seeing that guy get his butt kicked. And I agreed with him. I said, and that's the heel. And then there's always the tough guy heel, and that's just a harder way to go. And so I fit into that mold. I mean, in this character. So but he told me, he says, we are going to do everything we can to make the public believe that you're really this guy. He says, you're going to fly in first class. You're going to have limousine service wherever you go. And he said, and you're going to be making better money than you've ever made. And I expect you to stay at the finest hotels. No more Holiday Inn and Red Roof Inn. He said, the Hilton, the Marriott, and Hyatt. And I said, well, it's a tough job, but I think I can do it. And pretty much that's how it was presented to me. And then we went out again with Bruce Pritchard was on site with me when I did all those. He was the producer of all those vignettes that Vince wanted. Me kicking the kids out of a swimming pool and kicking the honeymoon, taking the honeymoon suite away from a honeymoon couple. And I don't know, probably the one thing that we did that was on live television that I hear more about than anything I did was, they said, did you really kick the ball away from that little kid dribbling the basketball? And I said, yes, I really kicked the ball away. But what you don't know is he really got the money. So it was a work, of course.
And of course, Rob Van Dam, you did the vignette with him as well. Did you ever talk to him about that after the fact, all these years later?
He and God bless him, man. He's become a big star in his own right, and he was from way up. I can't remember, way up in North Michigan. I can't remember where, just exactly.
Battle Creek. Battle Creek, I think.
Battle Creek, and he tells me the story, and I did that. I mean, I did that every night, so I kind of remember it and I kind of don't, but the bottom line is that, what he, where he went from there was, outstanding. I mean, God bless him, he's become his own star. And so, it's kind of like, every now and then I'll see him and I go, well, hey, Rob, I said, I still got another foot you could kiss. And he says, the price has gone way up.
There's a fan on here that says his favorite pro wrestling angle ever was you against Jake for the $1 million belt. The matches were epic. Do you have any memories of those?
Oh yeah. I tell people all the time, that they go, what was your greatest match? I mean, my gosh, I wrestled, every night of the week, for years. I said, you can't pick one match, but there were certain people and certain programs that I had that stand out, and that was one of them. Jake Roberts is by far one of the best wrestlers and one of the best guys on a microphone ever in our industry, and the other thing another reason that I loved it was that it made it easy for me, because you had two guys who basically grew up in the same, the same school of thought, the same, approached wrestling the same way, and understood our business. And so it just made it easy. I mean, it was like doing a dance with Jake, and we played off of each other very, very well. And again, yeah, that was definitely one of the most enjoyable times in my wrestling career, as far as working a program with a guy, and just, it was like we made a lot of money together, and it was easy. it was easy because the matches were so easy.
And how was working with Andre the Giant?
Andre was great, and of course, that was, we call it the rub in the business. Like when you see a new guy and you see he's got potential, you put him with somebody that's going to help elevate his status, to the next notch. And Vince wanted to get the $1 Million Man character over in a big way, and he couldn't have gotten it over in any bigger way than by putting me with Andre the Giant. And Andre didn't do a lot of fancy stuff, but Andre's understanding of the psychology of wrestling is as much as anybody's. And he was fun. I had a great time with the guy. Of course, when I was wrestling and we were tagging, I was the guy that was in the ring taking all the bumps, and taking the beating, and he was the guy, Andre didn't, he didn't have to ever sell too much. I did all the selling.
And Andre was known for always picking up the tab. Would he let you pick up the tab knowing that it was on Vince's bill?
No. He that's true about him. He would never let you pick up, he just wouldn't, and I would try, and I'd say, Andre, I said, but, Vince gave me this money and said, spend it, and he says, when you spend it, he just get the receipts and bring the receipts to me and I'm going to replenish it. And he says, no, boss, when you drink with me, you don't pay. So, but you do pay. You pay with a hangover the next day.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys did it, being on the road so long and those partying that happened in those years.
Well, I mean, it wasn't, you didn't, I guess that was the way of the road, you have the match and have the show, and you stop at the 7-Eleven and, and get the 6-pack or the case, depending on the length of the trip, and down the road you go. And by the grace of God, not too many guys, got into accidents and got into any trouble, but it was just, it was just the way of the business. And like not every, you weren't getting, it wasn't a bunch of drunks going up and down the road either. So, it was just what you did, especially when you were able to, when you didn't have to get in the car and go, too far down the road, or if you didn't have to go down the road at all and you stayed over, that's when all the serious, I guess, drinking happened.
Mike gave a tip and wants to know if you have any thoughts on Matt Borne, who you probably knew better in Mid-South than WWE.
Matt was a very good wrestler. He's a very good hand. He's just a different type of guy. I know that now somebody who is a dear friend of mine, Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Borne, almost came to fists. I mean, in the dressing room, and thank God we pulled Jim off of him, or Borne better got hurt and beat up pretty bad. But I never socialized with him very much, but I respected his work. He was good. He was good, very good.
A long story short, would like to know which millionaire influenced you the most. Was it Trump?
Of course. Of course, when you know that, I mean, the first 2 WrestleManias that I wrestled in were both in a building that he owns in Atlantic City. WrestleMania 4 and 5. And then, of course, Vince and Trump are known to be, good buddies and good friends. And yes, I voted for him the last election. And if he runs again, I'll vote for him again. Anything's better than what we've got right now.
Well, a lot of the fans on this channel feel the same way, even though we're based in Canada. Of course, you worked a lot with Macho Man. Speaking of WrestleMania IV, how was it being in the ring with him? And there was some fans on here that were asking earlier, are the stories with him being possessive of Elizabeth true, or did you find them exaggerated?
Yeah, Randy was a consummate professional. Uh, he was a good businessman, and I wish that I had his. Uh, I wish I had had his would have had his ability to save money and be frugal. Of course, a lot of the other guys in the business would say he wasn't frugal; he was cheap. But hey, you know what? God bless him, man. He saved his money, and Randy was great. The first time Randy and I ever wrestled was WrestleMania IV. We had never touched, and that match, the main event at WrestleMania IV that we had, was the first time we had ever been in the ring together. And of course, we went on and had a lot of other matches after that. But I respect his. I always respected his work and he mine and yeah, was he pretty possessive of Elizabeth? Yeah, and of course, when you're a wrestler and you're in the locker room with a bunch of guys, uh, that are on the road all the time and always looking for a girl or something. I could see where it would be easy for him to be possessive and protective of Elizabeth. But I think we all thought that he was holding the reins a little bit too tight.
Now, we talked about you having Hogan's first match. How was it actually feuding with him? Of course, I think you set the all-time ratings record for that Saturday night's main event thing you were involved with. I don't think anything's touched it, 14 or something up there. And SummerSlam 88, you guys headlined so many matches that are so well remembered over the years.
Yeah, I mean, the Saturday night main event, that was the one. That's the one. I mean, that first one where they shot the angle, and Hulkster, gets beat, and Andre gives me the belt because basically I purchased it, and then I wore it around for like a week, and then they said, you're not the champion, and so they stripped me of the title, and they can't give it back to Hogan because technically he lost it. They can't give it back to Andre because he won't take it because I've paid him off. And so what do? You have a tournament to declare a new champion, and that was the tournament at WrestleMania IV. And so, a lot of guys have wrestled at WrestleMania, but not too many people have 3 matches in one night at WrestleMania. And that's what I had that night was 3 matches, and the last match was with Randy, and of course he went over and became the champ, and the rest is history. And it was a great run, and it's kind of like I remember I had a conversation with Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson is somebody else who is also regarded by many as one of the sharpest guys that we ever had. I mean, you talk about a guy that could work, a guy who had great finishes, and it's like he told me, he said, originally, and what most of the fans would expect is you're the new, you come in, you're the new top heel, you're the guy, and so they would expect that you're going to go over, and win the title, and then and have your run, and but as a heel, if you did win the title, you wouldn't have it very long because Vince, this whole turn of wrestling and having a cartoon and all these wrestling characters that kids can watch, and Vince made wrestling family entertainment. And so all those little kids out there that are buying the toys, they don't want their champion to be the bad guy. So if you were to win the title, you wouldn't keep it very long. And so let's surprise everybody, because everybody assumes that's probably what's going to happen, is that you're going to win it, and we're going to put it on Savage, and then you, in your arrogance, create your own title. And as soon as Pat said that, I said, that's great, because that will put a ton of heat on me, and that's what it's all about. It's the heat. You know, it's like, you know, however you can get the heat, get the heat.
And you certainly had it. Rick Brooks gave a tip and wants to know if you have any memories of Buzz Sawyer from Georgia.
I don't have any personal stories about Buzz, but I watched Buzz work a lot, and this guy, he could go, man. You know, he was a unique individual, to say the least, but he could go. I mean, he was really good at what he did.
You mentioned the Matt Borne, Jim Duggan altercation in the dressing room. Did you ever witness any other backstage dressing room fights over the years?
No, I can't. I really can't say that I have. Most of those altercations, didn't happen in the dressing room. They either happen at a hotel or maybe, or in a bar somewhere or something. But I don't, I can't say that I have.
A long story short wants to know if you feel not having well-defined heels today hurts the business, and do you have any memories of the Nassau Coliseum?
Yeah, a lot of memorable matches in the Nassau Coliseum. I can't remember any particular match there. I mean, we wrestled in so many different places all the time. But yeah, it is hard to, have any definitive heel now. And, I don't think that's a good thing. I mean, again, anytime you go to a movie, you go to a movie, there's a story, and in the movie, eventually there's going to be a bad guy and there's going to be a good guy, and the movie becomes the story about who's going to win, who's going to win out in the end, and I do believe, it's just my personal opinion, I come from that era where I think there should be defined, lines. I guess there's some characters, like Stone Cold. Steve Austin and Steve was became one of the best, and I managed him for a while, and he's a guy who was a strong heel, but a lot of times eventually the tough guy heel, and that's what Steve was. He was a tough guy. My type of heel, like I said before, the cheap, what we call, again, excuse the expression, the chicken shit heel is the best kind of heel to be, because you never get tired of seeing him get his butt kicked, because he runs his mouth all the time. Yeah. And in fact, he can wrestle, and he really is good, but he just cheats every opportunity he can, and then lies about it. And then when he gets backed up into the corner, he begs off and becomes a coward. So you never get tired of seeing that heel get beat. And but I do agree that today it's hard to tell sometimes. And I don't know. I'm not there anymore. But it's kind of hard for me to watch much anymore, because I feel that way. I feel that way. It's just like, well, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and who's really getting over here.
And as of course, the Ultimate Warrior, you were featured in his DVD with some pretty harsh remarks. I've heard over the years you softened up a little bit about him. What are your current feelings of the Ultimate Warrior now?
Well, he was a guy, that in reality, there weren't too many of us in the business at the time when he was having his run. that cared for him because he didn't care for any of us. I mean, it was like he was pretty much a loner, and you couldn't tell him anything. He never really learned how to work. It's kind of like once you saw him one time, you saw him. There was nothing they knew. He would shake the ropes and run to the ring and crisscross and back and forth and pretty much beat his opponents up and go on. And they're just it's hard to like somebody that is not interested in being a part of the troupe, and that was him. He just wasn't, he was a loner, and so it was hard to like him, especially when you're having to work with him and trying to do business with a guy who's not really interested in you. He's just interested in himself, and that's who he was. And if you ask 100 wrestlers, 99 of them would agree with what I just said.
Well, Sid, who you managed, actually said something similar, and that's why he left the WWE the first time, I believe, was because there was issues in the match. But a lot of people have different experiences. But as far as managing Sid, how was that experience?
Sid, now there's a character for you. Sid and I got along. We got along just fine. We did, and it was kind of like, I think that Vince put me with Sid. Well, I don't think, I know. He said, "I'm going to put you on the road with this guy." He says, his words to me was, "Help him keep both oars in the water." That's the best way I can describe it. Was trying, but I had no issues with Sid. He's a unique character in and of himself, but he was a good hand too. He was a good heel.
Do you think he ever reached his full potential?
I don't not, maybe not.
John would like to know if you enjoyed your NWO run. I think we might need a part 2 to get into more details of your career down the road, but maybe you could briefly go over your jump to WCW.
Yeah, when I went to WCW, I wasn't leaving the WWF because I was unsatisfied or mad about anything. This was more about what was going on personally in my life. My wife and I had nearly broken up. I came close to being divorced, and that largely due to my own stupidity. And when I had gone back, when I stopped physically wrestling and I went back, I was a manager. And so managers weren't required to go on the road. They were just at TV. They did the TV shows and they did the talking for whoever they represented. And so they didn't have to go on the road. Well, then Vince decided he was going to put me on the road again, like with Sid and whatever. He kind of like he had said, "I want you to help keep this guy's oars in the water." And hindsight being 2020, I probably should have gone to Vince and had a conversation with him and explain how I felt about it. But I didn't do that. And later I did. And later meaning, after I went back the next time and I had that conversation with him, he told me, he said, "You should have come and talked to me." And at the time I didn't, I thought, this is Vince McMahon. He's a businessman. He's not interested in my personal issues. He's going to do with me what he thinks is best for the company and the organization. And so that's the way I looked at it. So the reason I actually jumped to WCW was they said that I could come there and do what I had been doing at the WWF, be a mouthpiece, for the wrestlers that I represented, be at the TVs, but I didn't have to go and do any of the house shows, and that's why I made the jump. So, I really, it was, they called them the Wrestling Wars, and personally, WCW lost. I mean, they a lot of guys went over there. Hogan, Hall, Nash, a lot of guys jumped and went over there. And for that short little run there, they were doing it because then the biggest angle in wrestling was the war between the two organizations. But and again, Eric Bischoff, I have nothing against Eric. It's just that Eric was given a job that he really wasn't. He wasn't the mind of Vince McMahon, and I knew that whatever it wasn't going to last very long. That ultimately the WWF would win that war, and they did.
And last question for today. I think your most memorable feud as Money Inc. was your feud with the Steiner brothers. And there's been tons of questions about it today from the fans. Could you discuss what it was like working against that legendary team?
Those guys were great. I loved working with them. I enjoyed it completely. It's like people say, well, what do you consider a hard match? A hard match is when you get in the ring with somebody that really doesn't know what they're doing, that you have to, basically lead them around by the nose, and tell them every single thing to do. And because, the way of wrestling is the guy, the heel in the match is generally the ring general. He's the guy calling the shots. And so when you got people that don't understand or aren't capable of that or doing that, and then there's even like Jake and I had this conversation recently. Like when we worked, our body language. There were things that we would do in the match, where we were telegraphing to the guy that you're working with what you want. It's like, if you say you take a big chop and you go down and you stagger towards the turnbuckle, well, then I just feel natural that the guy comes and grabs you by the head and runs your head into that turnbuckle. And then you spin around in the corner and you open up and you're there for him again. Well, those are just natural things that you do. So what makes a match hard or what makes a match easy is the key. And the Steiners were great. They were no complaints at all, and a high energy. Oh my gosh, a lot of it.
Do you find it weird that Vince isn't giving Braun Breaker the Steiner last name, or you think it's just a matter of they want to own the last name? Because it's weird that they'll bring Rick Steiner there to manage him, but he's got a different last name.
I don't know. I don't even know anything about that.
Okay. Where can fans follow you on social media if they want to look you up?
Okay. MillionDollarMan.com is one place. And of course, I don't know how many of the fans know that I'm a minister now, but I also have, Ted at Heart of David Ministry.com, heartofdavidministry.com. That's my ministry. And, who would think that the $1 Million Man would end up going that way, huh? Hey, everybody's got a price, and Jesus paid the price for me.
What brought you into that? Just like you always had a connection, or you kind of?
I've been a believer most of my life, and but during my years as a wrestler, and again in particular in the WWF, going from traveling mostly by car to now traveling in Learjets and limousines and reaching a level of recognition and stardom that I never thought I would have. I let it go to my head, and you know, was an idiot and did stupid things. And of course, that all came to a head in '92. I very nearly lost my wife and my family. And having survived that, you know, it just brought me back around to the reality that there's no relationship in my life that's more important than my life with Jesus Christ, my relationship with him. And but I never in my wildest dream thought that it would one day lead me to be a, you know, basically, I guess you would call my ministry evangelism. So because I go to a lot of, I speak at a lot of men's groups. I you know, like Tully Blanchard, I speak in a lot of prisons when I have the opportunity, and I speak in a lot of churches as well. And I tell my story. That's basically what I do, and God does the rest.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I hope we can do a part 2 sometime down the road, because we only scratched the surface. And I'm wondering if you could finish this off with your catchphrase and laugh, because people have been asking for it.
As everybody knows, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Facebook at the Hannibal TV for more live streams and videos. And while you're at it, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the Hannibal TV.